Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Welcome to the first episode of SOCcast. This is a live episode on LinkedIn, maybe other platforms too. And we are going to have a threat intel discussion, a roundtable with some very good friends. And that is Markus Neis joining us all the way from Switzerland. Hi, Markus. How are you?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for the invite.
And also Costin Raiu, all the way from
Bucharest, hello.
Bucharest. Thank you, Costin. This is I love it. This is a very global discussion. I'm your host, Ismael Valenzuela, working for Arctic Wolf. I lead the threat research and intelligence team under Labs, and based out of Northern Jersey. So all over the place today. And Markus, Costin, would you like to introduce yourselves, giving a little bit of your background to the audience?
Sure. I'm Markus Neis, located in Switzerland. I'm the senior principal threat intel researcher here at Arctic Wolf. I've been with the company now for a little bit more than 3 years. Have a background in intel, always done threat intel, and bring that to the table here. Basically, doing that for translating threat actor tradecraft into actionable insights from prevention, detection, and response activities inside our organization.
Thank you, Markus. Really nice to have you here. Costin, I know that many people may know you, but maybe there's some friends in the audience that don't know you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I talked to you guys from Bucharest, Romania, where it's super hot at the moment. I was doing some shopping outside. I was wow, like global warming is real. But yeah, I've been working for vendors for about 30 years, and then I left to get my black belt in Taekwondo. I felt it was one of my personal life goals to get the black belt in a martial art before I get to 50. And I'm also the founder of a think tank called The Art of No, which, by the way, in Japanese, no means skill or ability. So it's more of the art of skill, the art of being able to do things. We work mostly with the victims of spyware attacks, things like Pegasus, Paragon Graphite, Rain, and so on and so on. And we're trying to help the victims kind of in a non-profit manner to improve their security setups, to how to survive future attacks, how to understand what happened, why they've been targeted, and working also with different minority groups. Like, for instance, we worked in Iran with the Baha'i, which is a persecuted religion there, as well as Uyghurs, and so on and so on. So many different categories. So we're trying to help people basically to have a better security setup and to have a better experience in what they're doing.
I like that you bring that up, because that's something that we usually ignore in this field, right? We talk about IOX, or we talk about, which of course we'll talk about all those things, right? And Yara rules and all those things that we love. But we may not talk that much about the impact that this has on people and people's lives. And it's good to see. I like that skills and abilities applied to the good, right? For
to do good.
Yeah, to do good. Love it. Well, thank you, Costin.
Thanks for the invite.
That experience that you mentioned before is going to be very useful in this discussion. But this is a live event, so I'm seeing in the comments panel. I keep an eye on that. I see friends already saying hello from all over the place. Germany, right? From the UK. Hello, Dimitri. Who else is out there? Where are you guys joining us today from? I would love to see that. Wonderful.
Well, hello to our friend Dimitri.
Yeah, well, we have the audience saying hi. Just know that if you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them on the channel, on the chat panel, and we will be relaying those and incorporating those into the conversation. Now, Costin, since you mentioned Iran and the work that you guys are doing there, how do you feel about this whole situation? Obviously, there's a lot of noise, as it usually happens in this industry when a conflict like this bursts, and everybody's like, oh, this is what you should expect, right? Protect from attacks coming from Iran. Should we really expect this type of things, or have we learned anything from history, previous conflicts. I mean, this is not new, right? First thing that comes to my mind was Stuxnet 2010. Have we learned anything from that? Should we expect something similar, or what are your thoughts on that?
Mm. Well, I've been following the events, the war between Iran and Israel, and by the way, very happy to see now there's a peace or a ceasefire ongoing. So everyone's of course hoping for the conflict to be finished. But I've been following it very closely because from the history, from past events, I noticed that the most interesting cyber attacks typically happen in relation to one of these high-end cyber. I don't want to use necessarily the word cyber war, but there's actually cyber warfare happening in connection to existing kinetic wars. And for instance, when Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, we've seen like very interesting wiper attacks, of course, and that alone, I think, by itself was a very significant historical event happening because it affected people everywhere, not just in Ukraine. So, because of this Viasat wiper, which bricked Viasat modems, people are pretty much all over the world, like for instance, including in Germany, were affected. Wind turbines that were using modems in Germany were affected. They couldn't send telemetry anymore. So one of the things that I learned is that when a big war happens somewhere, nowadays it affects people everywhere, and you need to be always be on the lookout for things that can misfire or backfire in pretty much any direction. And you mentioned Stuxnet, and actually Stuxnet was discovered because it started to spread uncontrollably, and it just became omnipresent everywhere around the world. And that is pretty much, I think, one of the kind of characteristics of modern cyber warfare, that it needs to be very aggressive to be successful. It needs to be destructive. It needs to target critical infrastructure. It needs to target banks, telecommunications, electricity. I think those are the primary categories. So if I was working in these fields, again, financial systems, electricity, telecommunications, I would generally take additional precautions. And I think we'll get into what kind of lessons and precautions lately. But what we've seen, at least from June, from the war between Iran and Israel, was that attacks on financial infrastructures, they have huge potential to paralyze the country, to cause chaos. And from Ukraine, we've seen that attacks against electricity grids, telecommunications can also greatly impact people's lives. So you need to be on the lookout for these kind of things. I think it doesn't necessarily matter where you live nowadays, because the internet doesn't have borders. It's everywhere, right? Unless your country gets disconnected from the internet, which happens from time to time. But otherwise, the internet is everywhere, and this can impact everyone.
That's an interesting point. We may not see exactly the same type of malware. I'm just calling on Mohammed here, mentioning I'm not sure we're going to see Dooku or Flames or Stuxnet type of malware. Well, I mean, yes, it's been 15 years since some of those. I mean, I know you have a close experience with many of these things, Costin. But what do you think, Markus? Like you have a lot of extensive experience in the field as well, and you keep a close eye on the telemetry, right? That we see globally.
Yeah, well, kind of like what you alluded to, in particular, like critical infrastructure and any lessons from like Stuxnet, right? So there's like, I'm not exactly sure if we have actually learned a lot from that, because if you look at like the exposures of like critical infrastructure, like take an example from the US, there's like between 65 and 80% is like privately owned. And if you do some kind of like digging on Shodan, you can actually see how many SCADA systems or how many systems are actually exposed there, right? So there's like a really good chance that these systems are being exposed, and we have seen in the past that even if the attacks are not extremely sophisticated, Specific groups have basically targeted them by just like going for brute force attacks and finding like default credentials. And that's potentially sufficient for actually turning that into something that allows you to get access into really sensitive networks. The other side might also be, and Costin, you probably have also experience with that, like IO control that has been used by cyber avengers from like Iran before to target like specific IoT devices and other SCADA or PLCs. So you might actually see that being used again. Not very sophisticated, but it gives you like a way of like leveraging these systems, and you fly under the radar because the monitoring for these systems is pretty much not existent, right? So that there's not a lot that is giving you a way of like detecting that something is bad or something is not actually in the same way how it was before. But there's no EDR or AV or whatever on these devices.
By the way, I thought the question from Mohammed Talat was an interesting one in the sense that he's not sure if we're seeing Dooku Flames and Stuxnet type of malware anymore. I would argue that is a kind of a two-sided question. In one sense, we are not seeing in the sense that we are not seeing it. It's still there, but we are just not good enough to see it anymore. It's become so elusive and stealth that we lack the ability to detect things like that. So that's one possibility. I like to think that nowadays we are seeing only a small fraction of the most sophisticated attacks that have been even like theorized many years ago. Like the famous red pill, blue pill type of rootkits, hypervisor rootkits that we were talking about a decade ago. We still don't see or we don't discover them in the wild, and I'm pretty confident that they exist, but we just need to catch up in this sense with the attackers and try to implement more procedures such as scanning the BIOS, trying to leverage hypervisor APIs in order to scan it's also called negative rings, which are extremely difficult to detect. So in a way, I think here's what Mohammed is asking is very interesting, because on one hand, I think we are not seeing them, but on the other hand, I think there are still sophisticated types of threats out there. And probably in relation to the most recent wave of attacks that we've seen in Iran, I think that you're seeing probably, again, the tip, how these attacks have been prepared. Probably they've been prepared years in advance, months in advance. Everything was implanted, Trojan horses, logic bombs, everything has been deployed, and they can be very easily triggered whenever you need them. So that's one of the TTPs which are typically associated with high-end nation states. On the cyber criminal side, you know that when ransomware group targets you, it's typically days, like 6 days between the moment that they get access to your network until they exfiltrate and encrypt all your files. So it's very fast. It just goes away in a flash. While with nation states, there's like the long cloak and dagger game. Can take decades even.
I was going to ask about that, but the tempo, right? Everybody has been talking about retaliation attacks, but is that something that we necessarily are going to see like right away? Again, if we go back in time, obviously some of these threat actors had to build capabilities, and starting 2010, right around probably those threat actors started to develop these capabilities. But we saw in 2012, right, destructive attack against a very large oil and gas company in the Middle East, 30,000 machines completely destroyed. Was not very sophisticated. Like at that time, right, we could see like the threat actors using stolen tools or leaked tools with cracked tools, very noisy stuff like scanning with Nmap or Nessus, and using off-the-shelf tools. Obviously 15 years later they may have developed better capabilities, but to your point before, even these more sophisticated threat actors, they would have a plan. They would have developed these weapons, right? Let's call them weapons. Mm-hmm. But before you release them, you would have to test them, right? Would you test that against your victim, your intended victim, or would you test that in other places before you go and you execute your plan? What have you seen?
Well, just to provide like a brief opinion here, and I think Marcus probably also has some interesting experiences with that in observing how things were done against like big ISPs and so on. But what I've seen, and uh, to me, like probably you can learn the most by watching the history of Chinese APTs targeting pretty much everyone, starting with around, let's say, 2008. So if you look at what happened, like the Aurora attack, and we continue forth with APT1 and other popular things, APT3, APT10, and over the years, APT15 became super popular, APT27. All of these Chinese APT groups, they teach you a lot about someone who develops their capabilities and improves them, let's say, kind of in the wild. You're absolutely right here that you need to test it in advance. And there's probably two methods here. One, you wage a kind of continuous cyber warfare operation against a specific target, and you test your tools on the target, and then the next generation will be better, and the next and the next and the next. That's one thing. And the other one is, yes, you try to test them in other places, and maybe you've seen some incidents here, such as targeting by Iranian hackers of Albania, like the Albanian government with wipers, which is another kind of, let's say, interesting methodology. And of course, over the years, targeting Qatar, Rasgas, you mentioned the other one, and in the region, they've been very, very active. Now, of course, destructive attacks are more spectacular than the typical cyber espionage, so you don't get to see them very often. But at least my feeling is that nowadays we are seeing more and more destructive attacks than in the past. And perhaps this is one of the trends that cyber warfare is becoming very attack oriented. Like in the terms, computer network attack is what intelligence analysts call destructive attacks. Computer network exploitation is what they call cyber espionage. So I think that attacks are becoming more destructive, and the operations in general are more attack focused.
I think it answers also Peter's question. Very good comments, and please keep going. I'm keeping track of the questions. We'll go back to show then, and what are the things you can do, right, to reduce your external surface or your attack surface. But Peter said, we've heard the warnings of grave threats for decades. Where are they? Why have we seen only corner cases when it comes to critical infrastructure? So I think you answered that right now.
I'm worried. I tell you, the things that worry me the most are those that we don't see. And every day we realize that we see very, very little. Like the more you learn, the more you understand that we only see a very small fraction of what is happening out there. And I guess, yes, a lot of people are, in a sense, talking about vulnerabilities and the need to protect critical infrastructure and so on. But it's very difficult to prove that your defenses were actually successful. So everybody knows that the attackers need to be successful only once, while defenders need to be successful every single time. So because of that, it's very difficult to prove that you were actually successful with your defenses, and that you never failed. But yeah, I think we do still have a problem of visibility and continuous improvements. I think machine learning, AI models are helping a lot nowadays. They're becoming better every day. The rate of improvement is scary sometimes, and how these detection tools are evolving thanks to agents and the large language models is absolutely fantastic. But still, in my opinion, at least, a human analyst sometimes can make a huge difference. Simply looking at the logs with a trained eye is one of the nightmares I remember that Rob Joyce from the NSA was talking about in the past.
Yeah.
So I value the analytical skills and skilled people a lot, but also AI is improving very fast.
That may be a good segue into maybe the second part of the discussion, and I'm going to go to you, Markus, next. But before that, I may pick on something you said, Costin, and we're gonna agree to disagree here. Peter is mentioning the attacker's advantage is false. This is something I have been saying for a long time, right? Like, yeah, attackers, they only have to be right once. Defenders, we have to be right all the time. But it's also true that if you architect your defenses in the right way, you can turn that around, right? I'm a strong believer that cyber defense can turn that around. I'm still a believer. I've been doing this for 25 years and I'm still a believer. But I think that if you have the right visibility across all the stages of the attack and the right combination of prevention, detection, and response, that's going to get into something I love to talk about, which is time-based security too, right? The fact that prevention runs parallel to detection and response. If you architect in that way, you will have a lot of opportunities to disrupt before impact, right? And you could say, yeah, if you take it to an atomic level, the attacker only has to be right once. But if you take it to the attack chain level, the attacker would have to go through all of these defenses and in a stealthy way, right, and bypass all of those detections to be able to achieve objectives. But as you said before, it requires visibility, right? What do you think, Markus? I know you have built some models around that too, and pyramid.
Yeah, so I agree to kind of like the extent that you definitely have capabilities on taking away the value that a threat actor can reach once they are basically penetrating the network or moving further, and obviously like with different degrees of like value to the actor itself. So if you have like initial access and you control that, that's great. But then what about like there's credentials on the system, right? And then they can basically move from one system to the next one. That's like your blast radius. In theory, you basically want to kind of like take away the ability to get in first, but that is literally, or in many cases, not a reality. But then what you can basically do is like you can structure and architect your network in such a way that the systems basically reduce, or you can reduce the credentials that are being exposed. So like typical basic credential hygiene, domain administrator logging onto a workstation, that's very bad. Why would you do that, right? So you're leaving credentials on a workstation. Anything that is kind of like having higher tier credentials, leaving that on lower tier systems, that is like enabling a blast radius that you want to reduce. So you can kind of like logically at least architect a specific infrastructure that does not give immediately you the possibility to move from one system to the next one. And on the way, you can add additional mechanisms from a monitoring and hardening perspective. And then also from that regard, you are faster in your response activities, right? So if you move from one system to the next system and it's a flat network, your response is very hard, right? It will take ages to kind of like kick somebody out. If you have like a network with different zones and it's very hard to get from one zone to the other, you can focus on the specific zones and then say, here's my response action, what I need to do now to better reply or kind of like get them potentially out of the network or observe what is happening. Yeah, different concepts, definitely. But I also agree with what Costin said, because if you have like a threat actor with enough resources and enough persistence, then it's going to be extremely hard. And unfortunately, and Costin alluded to that before, yeah, we both have experience with that. We both have been working together on a few things and have seen these things happening, unfortunately, too often.
There's a good question here. When we speak about threat actors targeting religious organizations, which groups have been most active in targeting religious minorities specifically? And what are their preferred tools and attack methods? Any recent changes in how they approach their targets? That's a very specific motivation, right?
Correct. And to be honest, it's quite difficult to keep track of that, and it requires you to work with these religious organizations. They can be also minorities or They can also be different kind of disadvantaged groups over the world. We've been doing that a lot. Like I said, uh, in my experience, pretty you can see this kind of targeting pretty much from all the big sophisticated actors, and one may wonder why. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's in a way, religion, I think, is a powerful tool. It can tip scales in one direction or another. It can topple governments. It can start revolutions. And I'll give just an example from the Romanian history. In 1989, in communism, Romania was in, let's say, very, very difficult times, and the people were kind of fed up with the dictator. And it was actually a pastor from Timișoara called Laszlo Tökes, who he started to publicly speak against the regime. So yeah, of course they arrested him, but like people started to listen, and he how to say, he showed faith. He showed faith, and this grew and got bigger, and people in Bucharest heard about Timișoara, and that also got bigger and bigger, and at some point it just collapsed and everything toppled. So sometimes all it takes is for someone, one person with faith, to change governments or to change the fate of nations. And I think this is why religion is powerful. And I do remember there was, for instance, a Chinese APT group. Um, well, some people said it was APT 21. Other people say it was one of the groups associated with Operation Aurora, or Deputy Dog. So it's like this big sea of different names, or group clusters, if you want. But nevertheless, one of the interesting things to me was their targeting of a very particular religious group. And this was actually a missionary group. Their job was actually to spread that particular faith in China. So they were targeting within, let's say, many different computers in that particular church. They were going specifically for the missionaries, because I would assume that they were worried that has the potential to change how things are happening, and that's probably why Iran is targeting Baha'i minority in there, and we've been helping them. That's also, of course, why Uyghurs are being targeted, is the Tibetans, which are some of the examples that I know of. If Dimitri is asking exactly which groups have been most active, to be honest, nowadays I don't have the visibility and access to tell that anymore. But over the years, I think this one that I just mentioned, APT 21, was special in that sense that they were targeting these missionary groups, and of course the targeting of Uyghurs and Tibetans in China, and in Iran targeting of Baha'i. I think there are at least 2 APT actors in there that I've seen do those kind of activities. One was associated with the MOIS, the Ministry of State Intelligence, and the other one with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. So yeah, thanks for the question, Dimitri. Very nice to see. Hello to you back.
And that shows the importance of threat intelligence, right? We usually talk about the geopolitics, but here we're talking about religion as well. And maybe the answer to that question is like, well, whoever could be a threat to these governments, as you said before, that could
journalists,
be,
activists,
right? Activists, journalists, any of these individuals that could, or groups that could pose a threat, or maybe a perceived threat.
Perceived, yeah,
to these organizations. Well, let's go into the second part of the conversation, right? I think it's due. Let's say that many times we talk to small organizations, SMB, right, small medium businesses, that they say, you know what, I don't really care if it's Iran or if it's China or if it's, I just want to be protected. I just want to conduct my business. I just want to do my thing. Like, if we are working for a commercial organization that we believe, may not be a victim of a nation state, what do I really care about? Like Markus, you were talking before about the attack surface, right? Vulnerabilities. Like, do we have some data to share? Of course, I know we have some data. So.
We kind of like looked a little bit back for like the data we collected over the last few years, but we kind of like took an example from
let's show that
2024 in terms of like what do we see over and over, right? So it's kind of like a repeating pattern, and you can basically go and apply the same for this year and for the years before. It's kind of like exposed devices, vulnerabilities being exploited, in particular for like edge devices, firewalls, and different appliances. And it's kind of like a repeating pattern that we are seeing, that these devices get kind of like not patched, obviously, and there's like a tremendous amount of exposure and these devices are left and kind of like not being considered from like your posture perspective. And it doesn't really matter if you are considering Iran or if you're considering any other APT or if it's ransomware. They are all going for what is kind of like out there, and they don't care who you are, depending on like what you are exposing, because they will first like also kind of like compromise to see where they landed, right? So some of them might actually go opportunistic and then see, oh, is it valuable or not, right? And then they move on. And you have not necessarily the control over determining what if you are valuable or not for them. If you are a target for a specific purpose, then they will get in, and that's like their initial way to move further. On the other side, besides like these vulnerabilities that get exploited, we also see, and we have that from our IR data, that's the devices or kind of like the remote access that is being left out. And we have like the data that we have collected for our IR cases for ransomware. And we can actually see that there's like a huge number of like external remote access that is being abused for getting access into these systems. And that's like the statistics we have and the data that we see is kind of like, that's just like the same activity over and over. It's just like brute forcing, password spraying, and then credentials that are leaked somewhere and somebody reuses it. It's always kind of like the same pattern that we are seeing. You're kind of like not considering also oftentimes that with these appliances, or with these VPN and all that stuff, there's no 2FA enabled oftentimes, right? So it's just like getting easier to get in if you don't apply like your two-factor authentication. And if you have these devices and they come with 2FA, you should definitely go and enable that. Yeah, same for kind of like the intrusions that we saw. Repeating pattern again. There's just like this external remote access that is not being kind of like considered over and over. And kind of like to wrap that up, it's just like an external exposure that comes into like the exploitation that is possible, and then also the access that is not being secured. And yeah, it doesn't really matter who you are, and if you are kind of like a small shop, if you have the exposure, then you will definitely be a target.
And I'm going to go to the visibility factor that we discussed before, because yes, we're saying here 6% zero-day exploits, and I know some people would say, oh yeah, we can't do anything against that, right? I trust my vendor to take care of that. Ooh, didn't we talk about zero trust before? Well, what can we do to have like, I'm not saying no trust on the vendor, right? But at least like do not rely blindly on just the vendor for this. Like for example, one thing that I always say is just like review logs, enable syslog. All of these devices have syslog, right? Just like enable that and just look at, not for attacks or alerts necessarily, but just review your logs for 20 minutes every day. I mean, I know this is boring. No one maybe maybe some of us, we love to review logs, right? But maybe we're the weird ones. But there's a power that comes with that. I'm going to go back to what you said before, Costin, the art of the skills that you can build over time just by reviewing logs, and then being able to understand what normal looks like and understanding anomalies. Of course, if you add AI and machine learning, LLMs, all of that on top of that, wonderful. But the human factor there, just looking at these things. Like, for example, why is your device all of a sudden like doing an outbound connection to IP addresses out there on the internet? That should not happen. That's not really that difficult to find out if you have that visibility and you have the people looking at it, right?
I mean, right. One of the things that we've been doing for many years, and it was kind of, I would say, a specialty, was kind of finding the needle in the haystack, finding anomalies. And to hunt for anomalies, you can hunt them in network logs, but also you can hunt them, let's say, in file logs, sys logs, or all sorts of logs. So to me, if you draw the line, the single most useful and most important first step that you can do is to make sure that you have logs. Without logs, when something happens, you'll never be able to identify what went wrong. So, as again, just pure example, I started logging all the internet traffic coming in and out of my home about 10 years ago. And I still have all that because I think that probably sometimes in the future I'll get one of these notifications at some point from Apple or whoever. He will say that I was a target of a sophisticated nation state actor, and I want to dig. And if I have the IOX, I want to be able to dig. But practically, this can be reapplied, shared, and reapplied to pretty much any kind of customer out there or users. First, start with the logs. I think that is the most important thing. Uh, of course, you can also argue that patching old vulnerabilities, like super popular vulnerabilities, is also extremely important, and limiting access, like not just say exposing your remote desktop hosts just out there on the internet. I think that's also one of the most important steps. So probably overall, yes, it's a combination of many different things, and people have preferences. I acknowledge that some prefer to focus on early detection. Some of them prefer to focus on securing the system and making sure it's kind of impenetrable. Um, Me personally, like what I learned all these years, having worked, like I said, for 30 years for vendors, and looking around, is that logs are the most valuable thing you can collect and store for long-term periods of times, because they allow you afterwards, you can do machine learning, analysis, anomaly hunting, and you can do all sorts of interesting things as long as you have the logs. Without logs, you're kind of stuck in a way to and limited in the amount of steps that you can take.
I think you may not be the only one here in this room, this virtual room, that taps all of the network traffic in and out and looks at that. The kids love it. They know that, yeah.
Out of band network tap.
Right, exactly. Going back to Rob Joyce. Marcus, any other suggestions? I know that you look at a lot of root cause analysis, like why intrusions happen.
Well, the one that always worries me the most is kind of, let's say, using things in unexpected ways. And then you end up, let's say, getting hacked because you never imagined that could have happened, or that is how things work. And I'll give just one example here is, for instance, when you have a Google account and you start saving your passwords in your Google account. If somebody gets hold of your Google account, they get hold of your passwords as well, and that allows them to pivot into other things like your company network. If you don't have 2FA or multi-factor authentication, or you don't have some kind of, let's say, more strict policies in place. And these kind of, let's say, unexpected things, in special when it comes to the cloud, they worry me the most. Like, I don't know, just to give you some random example, maybe both my phone and my laptop, they're logged into the same Apple account, so obviously everything is shared, but I know that Apple does this the right way. With a trusted computing engine, everything is encrypted, so it would be very difficult for someone to own, let's say, the other device from owning one device. But unfortunately, in practice, we see that a lot. That like nobody expected what. So we never imagined. You have no idea how many times I heard that. We never imagined that if we do this, that was gonna happen, and that's actually what happened. So this kind of unexpected complexities in today's world, when accounts are connected, let's say Service X uses your Twitter account to authenticate, or your GitHub account, and then your GitHub account gets compromised and someone can leverage that. So these kind of connections are probably one of the most complex issues to track, in my opinion, and kind of what worries me the most. As well, of course, the use of cloud solutions, like just trusting cloud, putting everything into the cloud, Active Directory, Entra, and everything, putting it into the cloud, which works fine until whoever is managing your cloud or whoever is managing their cloud infrastructure gets compromised at physical level, like, or logical level, as it happened, of course, with Microsoft APT 29. These kind of things, yeah, they can happen. It might provide protection against some threats, and then you open another category of threats. So it's, in a way, it's never easy, and it's never foolproof for sure. But these are the kind of things that worry me the most: unexpected cloud consequences of connecting accounts together.
Putting too much trust right into one place, and then finding out there is a master key that gives access to everything. Oops. Markus, what do you think? And by the way, Pratima, hi. Good to see you here as well. Love to see a lot of people joining us today.
Yeah, kind of like, I mean, from what can you do perspective versus kind of like what is always happening, right? So if you kind of like start again of like the initial access stuff, the exploitation things, boring stuff again, that would kind of like oftentimes just stop it by just like doing some whitelisting, application whitelisting on the endpoint. It's just like also the things that you see that do not necessarily have to run on a system, right? Do you need to ngrok on a domain controller? Do you need ngrok running on like an exposed web server or something? Right? Comes back to like the story that you were saying, like unexpected things that all of a sudden happen on the system. If you don't log it, you will never see that. And then if you don't look at it, you will obviously also never see that. Yeah, so these things kind of like make a lot of sense and kind of like bringing it all together. But also you can take a lot of like easy steps in terms of just like figuring out what do you really need on your devices, and then just like applying a policy that prevents everything else from running, or just like enable your firewall. Your firewall can just like block things from reaching out to the internet. It's like basic stuff, which is boring, but it is quite effective.
Right.
You just need to spend a little bit of time looking at this and kind of like come up with like some baseline understanding of your environment. And if you spend a little bit, like half an hour a day or so, for like reviewing that and getting some understanding, you will also get better in figuring out like where do you actually need to go and fix things when something happens. Where can you have an impact? Yeah, I'm a big fan of simple things. So
and on that note, I know that you're a big fan of another simple thing, which is application allow listing, right? Just creating an allow list of applications that, okay, this is the only thing that can run. Now I know what you're thinking. It's like, yeah, you may be thinking this is not possible across the entire enterprise, but you don't have to do this everywhere, right? What are your thoughts on your experience on that, Markus?
So a really good attempt is obviously kind of like get like your servers and your domain controllers under control, right? So in the majority of cases, you don't need to run on these systems very specific or very, let's say, uncommon things from outside of like a typical administrative perspective.
You mean like running Wireshark on a domain controller?
You always have to do that, right? So the Mimikat might actually help you to see if there are any passwords that are very weak. So you should actually go and do that as well. No, like you said, right? So running Wireshark with the domain controller is Good example. Yeah, so start basically where you also would not want somebody to actually end up, right? So your workstations might be more difficult to actually create a baseline. Domain controllers and servers, probably the easier way to go and start with.
Now I know we're live, so I'm probably gonna say something you're not gonna like, Markus, but I think you're gonna be releasing something, right? Are we going to release something for the audience along those lines?
We are going to kind of like follow up with a blog post, and we are going to release like an initial WDAC policy that you can go, and that will block specific tools from actually executing on your endpoint. So like the typical things that are oftentimes used from an initial access perspective as a second stage execution. So like ngrok, specific payloads that will end up on the system that you don't want to have, like peeling and all of that stuff for establishing reverse tunnel capabilities. So
simple things. Yeah.
Simple
Talking
thing.
about asymmetric warfare, like things that are simple, low cost, built in. You don't have to go out and buy a new product that will have a big impact in reducing the blast radius and even like, reducing the likelihood of the attackers pivoting, moving laterally or things like that.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I would love to stay here longer. I think that our audience probably feels the same, but look at that. We've been talking for almost like 50 minutes. We were like thinking, well, we're going to chat maybe for 25, 30 minutes. And well, before we know it, it's almost like an hour. So let's wrap it up. And of course, we're going to continue with the Saltcast sessions as we go along. I think we're going to be dropping some links maybe on the chat to some of the reports that you have seen, some of the images or statistics that you have seen earlier. But to wrap up, I would like to go around the table and ask you for maybe some closing thoughts. With that in mind, right? If you're maybe the IT admin, I call these folks the all-around defenders, the guys that have to wear a lot of hats. That they may need to manage Active Directory, Entra ID. They may also need to manage the firewalls. They have to keep an eye on what's happening. What would you recommend? And I'll start with you, Costin.
Well, first of all, my very top recommendation would be to try to automate as much as possible. Like that saves time. So when you have more time, then you can do more things. If that can be like spending more time with yourself, reading a book or whatever, or just working on more systems and whatever. So I think that especially nowadays, automation is becoming very important. Filtering relevant alerts from irrelevant alerts, I think, is also very important. As well, let's say when you get to look at 50 alerts every day and every single one turns out to be a false positive, in 2 weeks you stop caring, like it's just another false positive until something real happens. So with that in mind, I think filtering and making sure that you do an alert or at least, let's say, prioritize the alerts, I think that's super important. There is, by the way, a very important rule which I try to follow as well. If you want to do 5 things, then plan for 3. Some people say like, that's aiming low, like all this management talk. I tell you a secret. This is psychology, actually. It proves that if you go and you try to do 5 things, you end up doing 3. So if you want to do 5, if you plan 3, you will do those 3 for sure, and maybe you'll have a little bit of more time. So just prioritize your targets. What is important? What are the important things to do? Like, let's say, logging, let's say patching, right? And reviewing the logs. 3 things. Every single day, maybe you want to do 3 different things, 3 other things every single day. And I think that will improve your life very quickly, and it'll improve your security, your organization's security as well.
I love that. I usually say it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be useful. Right. So to your point, Costin, like getting to the plan 80%, it's much better than not getting to anything, right? Or 10% of the plan. Markus, your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of like see it in the same way. But you were also asking about like if you're an administrator, you have like Active Directory and all of that stuff. So I want to kind like focus a bit on that. So there are like really useful tools out there now that you can just use that give you like a really good way of like getting an understanding of like your posture inside of like Active Directory. So I guess we are allowed to name a few tools here. So go and get like Ping Castle and execute that, and that will give you a tremendous amount of like really useful data that you can look at and see here are the issues you have in Active Directory. You have open file shares, go and fix those, right? So you can spend quite some really nice time with like figuring out like where are my biggest issues inside of Active Directory. You don't want to have like Kerberos accounts. You don't want to kind of like have over permissions for specific accounts as well. So like really useful things that you can get out of that, and it's very kind of like supportive in terms of like understanding where you are on your journey as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I think it adds a lot of value for many people from an Active Directory hardening perspective.
Great practical recommendations. Love those tools that you have mentioned as well. Well, thank you so much, folks. Thank you so much, Costin, Markus, and everybody that attended the Sockcast live today. And we hope to have you back sometime, Costin. We're gonna continue with this series. We'll talk, some days we'll talk about AI, and the impact of AI on what we do, practical things. And we would love to maybe have you over some other time to continue talking about threat intel.
Thanks for the invite, guys. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again, and also again, shout outs to the audience for their questions. And if I don't know, am I allowed to do a bit of self promotion?
Of course, absolutely.
Feel free to follow me on X if you aren't already. It's Raiu. And also together with my other two very good friends, Juan Andres Guerrero Assad and Ryan Rain, we're doing this podcast called The Three Body Problem. We're filming on Fridays, so every single Friday, every week, there's a new episode talking about cyber. So if you like podcasts, please you can try to find it, subscribe either on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, pretty much everywhere. So thanks for that again.
Absolutely. Maybe we can drop those links as well in the comments. We can add them as well as our X handles. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And may the logs and the other rules be with you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.